have the distinct pleasure of the only person I know in Santa Monica, there might be more, who has constantly confused me by calling the streets names that they're no longer called. I don't know how you do that, Nina. It's just like, Nebraska? I ran downtown Santa Monica for a very long time, and she did that to me often. Most of you know our esteemed Nina Fresco. She is a BFA from Parsons School of Design, and beginning in 2002, she served 3 terms as a Santa Monica Landmarks Commissioner. She chaired the Civic Working Group Task Force that studied the rehabilitation of the Civic, and she's currently on her 3rd term. She's a glutton for punishment as a planning commissioner. She is the founding member of Santa Monica Conservancy and has been instrumental in historic preservation projects throughout the city, so that treasured structures and significant neighborhood stories and histories are not lost. She engages in in-depth research and history of Santa Monica, unearthing what's behind our urban legends, and stay tuned for her upcoming book, First Around the World, The History of Santa Monica Municipal Airport. And I'm sure she will tell you more about that. We are very lucky to have her here. We're so happy that you've decided to spend a little time with us this afternoon. And without further ado, Nina Fresco.
Hi everyone, I'm so glad you're all here. And I'm going to, in about 35 minutes, I'm going to somehow manage to tell you most of the history of California, which is a lot of information. So I encourage you to think about the things that you want to know more about and ask questions when I'm done, and we can go into the things that you're interested in a little more deeply. And with that, here we go. Oh, maybe I'll silence my phone. What do you think? Okay. So, Arcadia Bandini de Baker. Arcadia Bandini de Baker's life spans several periods in California history. Her influence springs from the legacies of her famous father, orator and activist Juan Bandini, her impossibly wealthy first husband, Abel Stearns, and her second husband, Robert Baker, who was founder of the city of Santa Monica. I hope you enjoy the stories of all these historical figures as much as I do. In 1819, Arcadia's grandfather, Jose Bandini, a ship's captain, was sent to Spain's remote colony of Alta California to protect it from marauding pirates. Returning to conduct business, smuggling, Jose Bandini's ship flew the flag of Mexican independence from Spain in 1821. Jose Bandini retired from the military the following year and settled in Alta California with his eldest son, Juan Bandini, who would become Arcadia's father. Juan was formally educated in the law in Spain and Italy. He married Dolores Estudillo, a daughter of the commandant of the San Diego Presidio. Juan Bandini built a grand adobe residence on the San Diego Plaza, with whitewashed interior walls were accented with painted cobalt blue flowers and hung with fox hunting scenes and Americana, including a portrait of George Washington. It was furnished with heavy ornate pieces from Spain and hand-wrought silver, including one bowl bearing the family crest. Typical events at Casa Bandini included open invitation fiestas, where luxurious meals were served and music and dancing lasted until dawn. Juan Bandini, tall, lean, and graceful, was a gifted dancer. He is credited with bringing the waltz to California, and he was celebrated for his fine fandango. Well-educated, lavishly generous, and flamboyantly dressed, Juan Bandini was the epitome of the aristocratic Alta Californian. Yankee, Abel Stearns, arrived in Mexico on a trade ship. Born in Massachusetts to fifth-generation Americans, Stearns was orphaned at 12 years old. He was taken in as a sailor and saw the world at 23 years old. sound? I can try and shout. Can you hear me?
No.
No. I have a tiny voice, I'm sorry.
Works. Supposed to be a compliment.
So, backing up just a little bit, Yankee, Abel Stearns, arrived in Mexico on a trade ship. Born in Massachusetts to fifth-generation Americans, Stearns was orphaned at 12 years old. He was taken in as a sailor and saw the world. At 23 years old and already a widow, Stearns abandoned the seafaring life and became a Californian. Mexican citizenship qualified him to apply for land grants in Alta California. Stearns met Juan Bandini in San Diego in 1829. They became fast friends, working side by side on political and business endeavors for the next 3 decades. Physical distance from the Mexican government seat left Alta Californians vulnerable to invasion with little assurance of support. They called themselves Californios to establish their identity as citizens of a unique state within Mexico with unique needs. A territorial legislature led by governors appointed in Mexico was set up, but leaders sent from the south did not always act in the best interests of Alta California. Juan Bandini was an influential writer and public speaker. When he criticized corrupt officials for plundering the missions and abandoning the mission Indians, Mexican leaders were particularly displeased. In retribution, Bandini was accused and convicted of smuggling. He was probably guilty, but the punishment was particularly severe, stripping him of all his major assets. After struggling for a few years, Bandini was granted the Rancho Tecate near the Mexican border by a sympathetic new governor. There he began to rebuild his finances. Meanwhile, Abel Stearns, who had been getting by as a debt collector and surveyor, established the first retail store in Los Angeles. All trade in Alta California had been aboard infrequently docked merchant ships. Stearns' shop enabled Californios to trade hides, their only currency, for goods anytime, not just when floating department stores happened to be at port. It was so successful that he expanded his capacity with a warehouse near San Pedro. Now Stearns was fingered for smuggling and most likely guilty. The opportunities for skirting tariffs at his warehouse in isolated and remote San Pedro had not escaped the notice of officials. They repeatedly raided the premises and confiscated goods, but never caught him in the act. With his new wealth, Stearns turned his adobe shop in Los Angeles into a grand home he called El Palacio. In 1835, Stearns got into a knife fight with a customer in his shop. Stearns sustained deep wounds on his tongue and face. Left scarred and with a speech impediment, he endured the nickname Cara de Caballo, horseface, for the rest of his life. Now seen as a sympathetic and heroic figure, Stearns was elected to local office, serving under the Los Angeles mayor. Disorder at the missions intensified as they continued to be mismanaged and looted. The mission Indians were evicted and had nowhere to go. With an elaborate address, the incorrigible Juan Bandini, Stearns at his side, recruited a small army to install a Californio governor in Los Angeles, who would be less greedy, more compassionate, and help with a host of unmet needs in Alta California. The sitting governor stepped down voluntarily, deflating the effort, but he was not replaced by a Californian. In Bandini's absence, Rancho Tecate was being stripped bare of all livestock, tools, and furnishings. So he brought the troops he assembled there, where 10 days of bloody battle was waged with a group of hungry Indians responsible for the looting. Bandini was bankrupted again. The situation was dire on both sides. 3 years later, in 1841, Bandini's 14-year-old daughter, Maria Arcadia Francesca de Paula Bandini, married her father's rich 43-year-old friend, Abel Stearns. Arcadia Bandini was born in her father's San Diego adobe in January 1827. Her mother, Dolores Estudillo, died when third-born Arcadia was 6 years old. A stepmother, Refugio Arguello, took over her care when she was 8. Arcadia had 10 siblings and was raised surrounded by California society. The newlyweds moved into El Palacio. Like the Bandini home, El Palacio was an adobe structure with walls 3 feet thick and included a large ballroom. Arcadia's younger sister, Isadora, moved in with them, but not only as a companion. It was Isadora who managed the household and directed the servants. El Palacio was the center of society in Los Angeles, visited by virtually every important person who passed through the city. Arcadia, like her father, was an exemplary hostess in the old Spanish style. Stearns, with his many skills and great wealth, was a natural leader and magnetic host. The petite Arcadia, approximately 5'2", enjoyed gowns made of the finest fabrics imported from France. Isadora was similarly well turned out. They wore tortoiseshell combs, silk mantillas, and gold jewelry set with precious stones. Arcadia had a particular taste for diamonds. The sisters sewed and embroidered, and Arcadia played the piano. Arcadia's black hair, white skin, and quiet demeanor dazzled, while Isadora charmed guests with her livelier, outgoing personality. In 1844, Juan Bandini picked up his revolutionary's pen again. He still sought a territorial capital in Los Angeles and still hoped to see the breakup of the missions handled without rampant corruption and theft. But now there was also the imminent threat of an American invasion to strategize around. Stearns was sent north to calm unrest brewing near Sutter's Fort. He didn't get far. Things came to a head with a short battle at nearby Cahuenga Pass. Sutter was captured and imprisoned at El Palacio, ending the immediate threat. As a reward for the patriotic courage of the Californios, Mexican authorities appointed Pio Pico as the first Californio governor, with Bandini and Stearns serving in his legislature. Stearns, now very wealthy, had purchased several ranchos, and Governor Pico granted both Stearns and Bandini additional tracts. Abel Stearns was finally a landed Californio, and things were looking more stable for Bandini. Excuse me. As the threat of foreign invasion grew, Bandini called on Pico to act on reports of the approach of an American general, John Fremont. Governor Pico departed for the north to see to it, leaving Stearns in Los Angeles as his deputy, a de facto governor. Bandini, Stearns, and many like-minded Californios knew that in the event of war, the United States had the upper hand. Mexico still hadn't sent weapons or reinforcements. Many Californios gave up their allegiance to Mexico and welcomed the Americans to California, hoping for a peaceful transition without bloodshed and to be allowed to keep their ranchos. When American troops docked in San Diego, Bandini welcomed them, sumptuously hosting General Fremont, among others, in his home, which served as American Army headquarters. Bandini enlisted his wife and daughters, Arcadia, Josefa, and Isadora, to make the first American flag in California from their red, white, and blue petticoats. It was raised in the San Diego Plaza in July 1846. In 1848, the United States won control of Alta California from Mexico. Fremont became the territory. I just have to say that I find that petticoat story suspicious, because would ladies of that time really have wanted their petticoats in the square?
I question the blue.
Huh?
I question the blue and the red.
That's another point. But whatever, that's how the story goes. Can't prove it. You're very skilled. In 1848, the United States won control of Alta California from Mexico. Fremont became the territory's first American governor and chose several loyal Californios, including Bandini, for a legislative council. Both Stearns and Bandini were honored with other appointments as well. After California statehood, Bandini's Tecate Rancho, just south of the newly established border, was confiscated by Mexico because of his American sympathies during the war. The family tried to get it back for years without success. Can you still hear with that crackling? When the gold rush hit in 1849, San Diego was a bustling stopover for streams of gold miners heading for the hills. Bandini took out loans against his remaining ranchos to build the large and opulent Gila House Hotel, later renamed the Cosmopolitan. He also improved his home and continued his extravagant lifestyle of grand fiestas and all-night fandangos. Soon gold rush traffic died down. Bandini had planned to pay off his construction loans with the sale of cattle, but cattle prices plummeted and Bandini was forced to mortgage the hotel and his home to make the payments. He was about to default and lose everything again when Abel Stearns stepped in and bought out the mortgages to protect him. A few years later, health failing, Bandini transferred title to his home and most of his land to Abel Stearns to settle his debt, and drew up a will to guide the distribution of what was left. Juan Bandini, a passionate voice for fairness and the self-determination of Californios, died in November 1859 at El Palacio, the home of Abel Stearns and his daughter Arcadia. During the heady gold rush years, Stearns grew richer and richer. When Californios needed cash to pay lawyers to confirm their land grants, they went to Stearns. They paid him back in cash if they could, otherwise he was paid in land. Stearns hired Charles Forbes to superintend his ranchos, which now covered over 200,000 acres. When the drought of 1864 decimated Stearns' herds of cattle, and thus his cash flow, it was Stearns' turn to take out usurious loans. He transferred all of his land to a trust called Stearns Rancho Company to protect it from his creditors. Only Rancho Laguna, held in Arcadia Bandini's own estate, was kept out of the trust. Charles Forbes, who was 22 years old when he went to work for Abel Stearns, married Luisa Olvera, daughter of the judge whose home gave Olvera Street in Los Angeles its name. Forbes's mother-in-law, Maria Arguello, was the sister to the stepmother of Arcadia Bandini, making Forbes' wife a first cousin by marriage. I know those are confusing, but they're related, that's all you need to know. Stearns Rancho Company subdivided its vast holdings into small farm lots and ran an ambitious marketing campaign extolling the virtues of Southern California life. Luring the first major wave of settlers to Los Angeles, their approach became a model for California boosterism, and Stearns paid his debts. Stearns died in 1841. Arcadia Bandini Stearns, 44 years old, inherited 1/5 share of Stearns Rancho Company, El Palacio, and she still held Rancho Laguna. She also inherited cousin Charles Forbes as her business manager. When Arcadia Bandini Stearns married Robert Symington Baker in 1875, Baker was an extremely wealthy wool magnate, landowner, and oil investor. Baker and Bandini might have met through Baker's close friend and business partner, Edward Fitzgerald Beale, who was a friend and associate of Governor Fremont and was also well-liked by the Bandini family. Baker came from a small Rhode Island whaling town and made his fortune raising sheep in the early 1860s, ultimately partnering with Beale at Tejon Ranch at a time when wool prices were very high. In 1865, Baker and Beale went in together on an oil claim in Pico Canyon. After digging robustly gushing wells, they began efforts to purchase the underlying land to ensure their title and claim to the valuable oil field were indisputable. It was during this period of prosperity and liquidity that Robert Baker bought the 30,000-acre Rancho San Vicente and about 2,000 acres of Rancho Boca de Santa Monica. He and Beale used the mountainous part of the rancho for sheep pasture and envisioned a town on the flat plain that became Santa Monica. In 1874, Baker sold a 3/4 share in both ranchos to John Percival Jones, who built a railroad that made the idea of a future town viable. The town of Santa Monica was platted at its terminus. The railroad was Jones's operation, built to serve his silver interests in Inyo County, with Baker among the investors. Both men married their wives a few months before July 10, 1875, when the town of Santa Monica was recorded. In early 1877, I know it's a lot of years, Robert Baker announced that he would build a fine structure at the corner of Main and Arcadia Streets in Los Angeles, the site of El Palacio. The grand edifice would honor his wife and himself and replace and outdo the old adobe made famous by Abel Stearns. Meanwhile, concerns about control of the oil claim were justified. While a drawn-out lawsuit was underway, Baker's finances were stretched thin. He looked for a loan to maintain the mines, pay his attorneys, complete the Baker block, and buffer him through a drop in wool prices. Finally, he opted to sell 15,000 sheep and all his horses to his wife for $34,000, paid with cash dividends earned from her share in the Stearns Rancho Company. By June, John Percival Jones, whose silver mines had been depleted and also needed money, sold his railroad to the Southern Pacific Railroad Company. The fledgling town of Santa Monica almost disappeared when they demolished. I have a book about the airport company. The fledgling town of Santa Monica almost disappeared when they demolished Jones's Wharf and greatly reduced rail service. To make matters worse, bank failures caused a national economic downturn. Baker sold his remaining quarter share in Rancho San Vicente and Rancho Boca de Santa Monica to his wife in 1879 for $50,000. This allowed him to maintain liquidity while keeping the down-on-its-luck town and rancho in the family and staying out of debt. By 1883, the crisis had passed. The sheep were flourishing and the mining lawsuit was resolved in favor of Baker and Beale. They now held a majority share in the oil rights of the Pico Oil Springs mine, in addition to the underlying land. Baker more or less retired from active business, moving from growth to maintenance mode. Charles Forbes continued to manage all the Baker and Bandini resources according to Baker's instructions. Juan Bautista Bandini, Arcadia's youngest brother, became an integral part of the Baker household. Juan Bautista was widowed twice. His motherless girls became close to their Aunt Arcadia, who never had children of her own. In 1880, Juan Bautista moved into the Baker block with his two daughters. And when the Bakers purchased a home at 1247 Ocean Avenue in Santa Monica the following year, Juan Bautista moved in and became its caretaker. The well-appointed Baker cottage was finished in fine woods and stained glass and equipped with gas lines, indoor plumbing, and hot water for baths. In his room, Juan Bautista used a wardrobe and a clock that had belonged to Abel Stearns. The Bandini Bakers moved freely back and forth between their Santa Monica cottage and their primary residence in the Baker block. In Santa Monica, Baker took Juan Bautista with him to check in on the sheep and meet with the ranch foreman. Eventually, Juan Bautista was sent on his own to do those things. When the family was in Santa Monica, they entertained guests and family members, enjoyed carriage rides in the canyons, or traveled down to the Bayona wetlands to fish or shoot ducks. In the evenings, they played cards late into the night. Wine and liquor flowed freely in the Baker household. In the summer of 1882, Baker purchased the Polywog, a large floating duck blind made into a comfortable vessel for 20 passengers. Baker brought friends, family, and business associates there with ample provisions for feasting and drinking. When evening came, a carriage brought Arcadia and the other ladies back to the house, while the men stayed on to carouse overnight or for the weekend. Over time, the amount of liquor brought to the Polywog for Mr. Baker went from a single bottle of whiskey or a six-pack of beer to quantities counted in cases. One of Arcadia's nieces made a flag to fly over the Polywog, and a few years later, when the Arcadia Hotel was under construction, Arcadia Bandini made a flag for the hotel as a gift to its proprietor. Flag making, it appears, was a family tradition. Baker suffered from frequent illnesses that lasted for days, often the result of drinking binges, or perhaps they were drinking binges. Mr. and Mrs. Baker didn't travel together to Santa Monica from Los Angeles on the same train anymore. Baker typically arrived much later and not entirely sober. For Baker, developing the town of Santa Monica was a low priority. He was content to maintain and enjoy his wealth. Whereas the Jones family had a Harvard-educated son, Roy, and an attorney nephew, Robert, coming up in the next generation. They were anxious to start their careers by managing the Santa Monica holdings. Roy and Robert Jones were closely involved in the day-to-day business of the Santa Monica Land Company and were full of ideas to make the stable asset into a profitable modern venture. The Joneses had long been fed up trying to do business in Santa Monica with the increasingly erratic and moody Mr. Baker, who resisted every improvement or investment, forcing them to pay his share if anything were to move forward. They had been trying to buy him out for at least 4 years. The following letter, dated March 1st, 1890, from Jones's attorney, Walter Van Dyke, tells the story. It is from the Joneses collection here at the History Museum. I cut out a few references to other projects to shorten the read. Here's my Walter Van Dyke voice. Dear Sir, I have just succeeded in securing from Colonel Baker a written offer for his, or Mrs. Baker's, in the Santa Monica Rancho. I told him frankly that unless something definite should be submitted in writing, that it was useless to talk further about it. That if he would give me an option for, say, 30 days, I would submit it. He finally signed the offer, a copy of which I send you. I happened to strike him in the right mood, or I don't think I could ever have got him down in writing. I don't think you folks ever ought to let this chance slip. You never will have peace and cannot make improvements or go into any enterprise to benefit your large interests at Santa Monica without carrying Colonel Baker along. Besides, I think there are some big schemes on hand among the railroad folks in reference to this section, and you should be able to control matters. With Baker out, you can get sense, life, and energy to help you develop the place and make your large prospects valuable. Yours being, Walter Van Dyke. No deal was finalized as a result of that offer. In 1889, the Santa Monica City trustees discovered that a new town map had been recorded by the founders that reduced the 200-foot width of Ocean Avenue to 125 feet, and it eliminated a city park block on 7th Street. After seeking an explanation and being ghosted for months by Senator Jones on the subject, the city filed a lawsuit against Jones and Baker. In 1891, it became apparent that the founders were in a deal with the Southern Pacific Railroad that ultimately resulted in a tunnel under the bluff and tracks heading north where the Long Wharf would be built. According to their contract, if the wharf were a success, the railroad company would be able to remove the bluff to the edge of Ocean Avenue to make room for more tracks below. The founders had thus remapped the town to take 75 feet from the extra wide city street already deeded to the city, so it would be at the disposal of the railroad company. The lawsuit resulted in a settlement that further reduced Ocean Avenue to 100 feet, but required the founders to leave a bluff-top park never less than 25 feet wide in place, which was granted to the city, Palisades Park. The same agreement also saw what is now called Reed Park granted to the city, perhaps to make up for all that was lost on the bluff. Luckily, the railroad never expanded, so the bluff was never cut away. Baker's health was declining during this period, forcing him to take to his bed for stretches of weeks and months. Juan Bautista Bandini still made business rounds with him when he was up, but left when Baker went on to what Juan Bautista called champagne sprees at the Arcadia Hotel. Around this time, the early 1890s, Juan Bautista started to refer specifically to his sister, Arcadia Bandini, now 65 years old, as the Baker, who was the quarter partner with Jones. This was a fact that had been a mere technicality in the decades since she bought her husband's interest in the rancho and gave him power of attorney to manage it. For their part, the Joneses realized a Baker buyout would never happen and that partitioning their shared holdings was the only way to end the partnership. In a private meeting with Senator Jones, Robert Baker was convinced. Roy Jones, Charles Forbes, and Juan Bautista Bandini surveyed the joint holdings. In spring 1893, hundreds of Santa Monica town lots were traded between the two partners across 6 lengthy deeds. Before partitioning of the rest of the rancho land could occur, Baker's health plummeted again. He died at the Baker Block in May 1894. His obituary blamed a heart condition, and his death certificate cited gout as the cause of his death. Forbes had become erratic and sloppy in his work. Like Baker, he was well known for tipping a glass. Juan Bautista tells that he and Arcadia had a hot argument, perhaps about Forbes and his management of her affairs. He pushed Arcadia to take more of an active interest in the details of her business. Juan Bautista began meeting much more often with Arcadia and Forbes at the Baker Block to discuss business. Forbes still handled the paperwork, bringing documents to Arcadia for her signature, but neglected more tedious tasks, such as making collections of rents or paying household bills in a timely manner. In September 1900, Charles Forbes died of cirrhosis of the liver, having been employed by the family for 43 years. The meticulous and conscientious Juan Bautista took over management of the books. By this time, much of the outlying rancho land had been transferred to a corporation in which the Joneses and Arcadia Bandini de Baker each had shares, a setup similar to the Stearns Rancho Company. Juan Bautista now had power of attorney, which he used in close consultation with Arcadia and her attorney since the Abel Stearns days, Henry W. O'Malvaney. Free of her husbands and a chaotic business manager, Arcadia Bandini de Baker, now in her mid-70s, was finally in control of her own estate. During the 2 decades between the death of Robert Baker and her death, Arcadia sold an average of only 8 parcels per year. This minimalist approach to business was no longer holding back the ambitious Joneses, who had been freely subdividing and developing their share, as evidenced by the fact that Santa Monica grew 5-fold during the same period. A newspaper report in 1902 hailed Arcadia Bandini as the most charitable widow in Los Angeles. For decades, she had been visited at the Baker Block by a steady stream of needy relatives who shared stories of their difficulties. She cried with them and handed them gold coins as they left. It was reported that she had assisted over 64 family members in a single year and paid for dozens of family weddings and funerals. She donated to scores of churches and church fairs and gave her many nieces extravagant gifts of diamond jewelry. In 1905, Juan Bautista Bandini passed away. The events surrounding the creation of the first American flag in California by young Arcadia and her sisters were celebrated in 1906 on their 60th anniversary. Arcadia Bandini de Baker attended the grand public event in the plaza in San Diego where she grew up. A news report described her at the event as filled with deep emotions and queenly dignity. Her glory years behind her, legends of Arcadia Bandini's romantic youth were told and retold in idealized feature articles in newspapers and magazines. The colorful fiestas at her father's house in Old California, the balls hosted with Stearns at El Palacio, the bon vivant days she spent entertaining with Baker were topped by extreme notions of her charitable giving. Arcadia Bandini lived in her Santa Monica cottage during the final years of her life. She died there on September 15, 1912, at the age of 85, surrounded by family. She was laid to rest at Calvary Cemetery along with her 2 husbands, closing the curtain on the founding era of the city of Santa Monica. So tell me, what did I blur over that you want more info on? Yes.
So that whole mess with the homeless encampment along San Vicente,
The whole mess with the what?
homeless encampment on San Vicente, about 3 years ago,
Okay.
because the Veterans Administration was not taking care of them. This is a whole long story, so I'm just going to kind of jump over.
Does it come back to this? Yeah, okay. Just making sure. Sorry, I'm a commissioner. I always have to make sure.
All right, I'm just going to jump to 2025. The Veterans Administration has been using the land for the UCLA baseball team with parking, a field and a parking lot. Sports facilities for schools in Brentwood. I think car rental, storage, Marriott Hotel,
Right.
laundry, anyway. They had not been taking care of
The
the
veterans.
visits. So 2025, David O'Connor, the judge, the homeless judge in Los Angeles, finally rules all those contracts are null and void because Arcadia Bandini and John Jones put it in the deed when they donated it. It was for the veterans.
Right.
Any comment?
Yeah, well, that's all. I could give a whole other lecture on that topic, so I will try to be succinct if I can. It's a really interesting story. So as you can see, Arcadia Bandini was the owner entitled to a quarter interest in the land. So it is true that Jones and Baker, Arcadia Bandini to Baker, donated land to the VA. The parcel that they donated was, the full parcel that they ended up donating was actually 600 acres. 300 acres belonging to Jones and Baker, and 300 acres in an adjoining rancho that belonged to a whole bunch of other investors. That's a whole other story. So, yes, they donated it, and yes, it was required to be used for the soldiers in perpetuity. And I guess that's all that you really asked, so I will restrain myself to make room for more questions.
Well, only that that's how David O'Connor ruled, but of course the parties involved appealed within a month.
Right, well, of course
So
they
it's
did,
not
but that
a-
is in fact in the original deed, and I think that still stands. I don't know. I'll pick you because you're all the way back there and it's fun.
Watch the fabulous slides that you showed. There was a house, like a gray house that was sort of like a current day photo, but I don't think you mentioned anything about what that was. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Was it a cottage?
Maybe, but it was a picture, it looked like it was taken recently because it had, like a stop sign or a...
Oh, that was Baker's house.
Okay.
And that was the house where Robert Baker was born in Warren, Rhode Island.
Oh, that was the Rhode Island house.
That was his
Okay.
the home, I tried to put little, but they're tiny, yeah. I went to visit it, by the way, this summer in real life, but the picture my friend took of me wasn't as good as the Google picture. Sorry. Yes.
Where did the money go? I kind of missing it out here somehow.
Where did all the money go?
Yeah. I mean, did Arcadia die with a lot of money? I mean,
Yeah, so what happened, so basically her father's estate went to Stearns because Stearns loaned him all this money and bailed him out. And so he got the land. So first of all, part of the reason she was so generous with her family was survivor's guilt, because the money all ended up hers and didn't get distributed across the family. So that's a first thing. So then Stearns got into trouble and he started the Stearns Rancho Company, which had a number of investors. So as far as the land that he got from Bandini and then the land that he acquired through his own means and got from his money lending business, the 200,000 acres, by the time he died, it was in this company and he had a 1/5 share in the company. So Arcadia got that. Although by the time of her death, most of that land had been sold and that company, I think the company still existed and still did business, but it wasn't worth what it was previously. So then, so what she came into with the marriage in her own estate was the 5th share of the rancho. She had El Palacio, the downtown LA property, and Rancho Laguna, which was a gift that Stearns gave her when they first got married. And he told her, don't ever sell this because someday LA is going to spread down here and it's going to be worth tons of money. So just don't ever sell it. So I think that's kind of what stuck in her brain, that she just should never sell anything, because she really didn't. And so then when she married Baker, he benefited from her wealth, but she got the sheep, which were worth the money she gave him. So she did get, so in her estate, there was stuff, and then there was also, Baker had all the oil wells. So when she died, she had the oil wells, but actually I think they were kind of almost depleted, and Standard Oil actually bought those oil wells from her and Mrs. Beale. They were actually Standard Oil's first oil wells in California. At least that's what one book I read said. It was really rough reading a book about oil companies. So she did have some money from that. He had a few other investments, and she had the quarter share of Santa Monica that was pretty much what Baker left her, because she hardly sold any of it. And when you look at the Santa Monica map and you see a lot of empty or bigger lots, like the parcel where Memorial Park is and the parcel where Garfield School is and parcels up the middle that were larger later, all Arcadia's, because she never subdivided or sold it. So when I was going through the records and I said, oh, that was hers too, it just really explained a lot. So she ended up with about $1 million in assets when Baker died. And most of it, no, wait, that's not right. She had $6 million in assets, that's what it was, when Baker died, and $1 million of it was various investments, and $6 million of it was Rancho Laguna. So, and then she didn't leave a will because she didn't want to choose between the family members, and she just thought, it was a conscious decision. Her attorney, Henry O. Mulvaney, explains his discussions with her about it and says that she thought that the state law was the fairest rule, and that was what she wanted to do. So that's what she did. She left no will. But there were Baker relatives and Stearns relatives who showed up and contested, and then she had a mother and a stepmother, and so some people were her full siblings and some people were her half siblings, so there was like a big debate about that, and eventually they settled it all in 1916, I think. Yes. Oh wait, Judy keeps asking. You are louder, but she was first.
Oh.
Judy.
Okay. So what you're talking about is the main part of Santa Monica, I think. Was Ocean Park part of what was being bartered back and forth?
No, because everything south of Pico was on the Rancho La Bayona, which is not one of the ranchos that Baker and Jones shared.
I see.
So it was a completely different rancho, had a completely different history, different people bought it from the rancho people, and it was annexed to this Ocean Park. The subdivision in Ocean Park by Strand Street, like they call it South Santa Monica, was actually subdivided 3 months before the city of Santa Monica, in case you were all wondering. Ocean Park rules. And a bunch of rich guys built summer houses there, and then Santa Monica started. And so when they were incorporating the city of Santa Monica in 1886, first they just decided to do a small area, like pretty much downtown, but maybe as far east as 11th Street. And the county supervisors were like, nah, and then it didn't pass. And finally, after 3 different votes and negotiations with the county supervisors, they ended up going all the way up to 17th Street and including what we think of today as Ocean Park. So it was part of the city from 1886 when it incorporated. And then the rest of the south side was annexed to the city in 1905.
So the reason I ask is how the Botters got connected to all of that. Maybe they
yeah.
didn't, but
Well, what happened was the Rancho, part of Bayona, Rancho from 20th Street West, was purchased by a woman named Nancy Lucas, and she was poisoned. We don't really know who it was, but I think it was her son. Whole other story. But she was poisoned and died fairly early on, and her ranchos were subdivided, and one guy bought most of what was east of Lincoln Boulevard, and Vaughter bought about a third of all of the area of Ocean Park west of Lincoln Boulevard. And he was also one of the very first settlers on the north side. He started the first store on the north side, and so he was also the driver of the incorporation. And the reason he wanted to incorporate is he wanted railroad rights so he could build a horse car line to connect his investments on the south side to the north side so they would become valuable and he could develop them and make money.
okay, that helps.
I live at the Vaughter house, so.
She lives in the Vaughter house. Ocean Park rules everybody. Mark?
It must have been a shock in 1912 when both Jones and Bandini died.
They died 3 months apart. Yeah.
Wow.
And I always find it interesting that Baker and Jones both got married like months before they launched this town of Santa Monica. I don't know why, but that both of them did that. And they were both widows. And Baker had, this is just another thing that I discovered that was hard to find, so I want to share. But that Baker had been married in Warren and had 2 daughters, and his wife, and I know his wife when his wife passed away, and then around 1879 when he was having all this trouble, there were news reports that his last daughter died, and I've never been able to find a trail of the other daughter, but she was clearly already dead since this was his last child. So he was a widow and had 2 children, and they both passed away. And Stearns likewise had been married in Massachusetts and had 1 child, and both his wife and child died before he, and so I guess that might be why he decided to start over in California. Yes, Lisa?
I feel as though we have so much information on sort of the social life of the Jones family, and the sort of lots of partying and political gatherings and croquet and riding of horses that happened over at their house in the Miramar. But we know very little about what was happening at the Stearns and the Baker home. Do you know what was going on over there? Were they having salons? And
They were having a lot of parties, so the Bandinis didn't like publicity. You know, Arcadia's brother, Juan Bautista, wrote these he kept a diary from like 1879 until his death in 1905. But his entries were very terse and lacking in adjectives. My favorite example is, saw electric lights for the first time. Period. I don't know, I thought he might have expressed some wonder, but he didn't. But it was very clear nonetheless from his diaries that any publicity of any kind about Arcadia or the family was not welcome. So they were not mentioned in social records in the newspapers or anything like that. But we know there were parties in both the Stearns and the Baker households. Well, first of all, Juan Bautista that's how I know that he went from bottles to cases at the Pollywog, is Juan Bautista was the guy who was ordering them. So he would say how many cases of champagne he ordered for the party that weekend. So we know there were parties because he reported there was a party. There were a few memoirs. Harris Newmark was one, and some older memoirs and biographies from the earlier days that mention events at the Stearns house. There was one really huge party, and all the officers were there, and all the women had to wear the colors at the Stearns house, and they all had to wear the colors of the Mexican army, and it was like a whole big thing. And then there was a fight at the party between the Californios who were loyal to Mexico and the Californios who were fed up with Mexico, and it was a big thing, and people were scared to go out in the street for a few days. So there was a lot of lively stuff going on. Yes. Yes. Sorry.
The house downtown, is that still there? And
No, it's under the freeway. But it became, what's kind of ironic about that house, the Baker Block you're referring to, is it became the Salvation Army for many years. And it was also became like an artist's enclave. So there were like funky art studios in there. So it kind of had a kooky afterlife before being torn down.
So how would you characterize Arcadia and her life? I mean, some things are attributed to her that aren't true. Like she established the old soldiers' home, and she donated land for Pacific Palisades Park. But what did she really do? I mean,
Well, she was a woman of her time, and she was very proper. And I refer.
I'm sure she was like a really nice lady.
I think of her. I always describe her as an imperial princess with a heart of gold. Because she was very, she would Juan Bandini went with her. She would go to San Francisco a lot. And one time he was really excited. I actually could feel the excitement in his terse language to go to San Francisco with her. And he described how she would just sit in the parlor and hold court, and the people would come in, and the silver dealer would come and show her samples, and she bought new silver play settings. I was just noticing there was an accounting of what was in her house when she died. In her, there was a whole thing with her will and all that, and she had silver service and plates for 6. So their parties at the Baker house were not big. At the Stearns house, they were big, but she only had service for 6. I got more than that.
I don't get a strong sense of.
It's really hard to figure out that, Lisa.
So what about the ongoing, I don't know if it's mythology or it's true, you can tell us that she refused to speak English, but we know that she wrote letters in English, didn't she?
I've never seen anything that she actually wrote in English. The one time she wrote a letter to a newspaper that was quoted, that is attributed to her, her niece actually wrote it on her behalf. And so they say that she didn't speak English before she married Abel Stearns for sure. She could probably read because she had to read the Bible, but very few people were taught to write in Alta California. That was one of the things her father was very freaked out about, was that there was no education. That was one of the things that he was like, Mexico, send us some teachers, for God's sake. So she learned to write while she was married to Abel Stearns, and you saw it, they had a slide there of her signature. It was very careful and kind of meek. And I think because she was not confident.
Not confident?
With her handwriting, because it was, something she learned so much later than most of us.
There weren't any other prominent women as prominent and as powerful as her with holdings in the real estate and conducting businesses, especially after the deaths of their husbands. Were there? Were there other?
There were. Mary Hotchkiss, Hotchkiss Park.
Yeah.
She was gangbusters. But she was also scandalous. She was a woman of ill repute because she was divorced and she conducted her own business and she wore really cool hats. So,
Scandal.
There was. Daniel?
Is there anything on her personal life? I mean, it seems like everything in her life was a financial arrangement. And we all know that money doesn't bring you happiness. She had all this money, but is there anything on her personal life?
There's so little information. I mean, in my longer, more detailed writing, I literally wrote every single thing I found about it because there was so little. I didn't want to lose track of any piece of information. And basically, she was very religious. She spent a lot of time with her nieces and just visiting with family and holding court for all the people who came to see her. We just don't know.
Did she interact with the other Mexican Santa Monica, Reyes, Castillos, the other Mexican families?
Only if they were fancy. She was fancy. So, I don't think she identified as Spanish. She did not identify as Mexican. And she, people who she thought were Mexican were not in her class, in her view. The one letter that I was referring to, that's what it was about.
So in considering herself European, but not sort of fitting in with the popular European sort of complexion of things in Santa Monica at the time, I can imagine that she faced some racism and some discrimination from the local gentry.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm waiting to read all those letters you have about Jones to see what the Jones attitude was. But Juan Bautista Bandini, definitely, he had a big problem with Roy and Robert Jones. He felt that they were very condescending to him. And it wasn't until the husbands and Forbes were gone and he had power of attorney and actually had clout that they treated him with any kind of respect. And and I know that they were always trying to trick them because they wanted to sell parcels desperately, and Bandini didn't want to sell them. And so they would sell them anyway, and then Juan Bautista would do the accounting, and he'd be like, dude, you sold my thing. And they'd be like, oh, sorry, I'll give you this one instead. So if they could sell a parcel, they just sold it. Yeah, bummer, right?
Can't you say something that in some of the parties they would dress in the colors of the Mexican army?
I was just mentioning there was one event at the Stearns. So that story came out of, there was a...
Well, doesn't that contradict her attitude towards Mexicans because she was Spanish?
Well, that was in 1902 when she said that about that. And the event where they were dressing up, that was because the Mexican soldiers were coming for an event at her home at El Palacio in Los Angeles in the 1840s. So it was, those two events are 60 years apart.
So would Georgina Jones invite her to the parties, or would she not interact with Georgina Jones? Or?
I'm not sure. I haven't read the letters yet, sorry.
Come back for that one.
Huh?
Come back for that talk next
Yeah,
time.
well, I'm going to be here a lot soon. I keep saying that, but I will get there. I see Michael's armor.
Where was this floating log? Was it floating large?
In Bayona. There's they bought, of course they bought the parcel next to it, which was later a subdivision. And there's a little spit and then a subdivision. If you look at the map, you can see it on Google. Still there. And that was the land they owned where they docked it. Anything else?
And the Baker blocks were which blocks in downtown?
The Baker block was on Main and Arcadia Streets, which is now under the freeway.
Near Arcadia Terrace in downtown LA.
I'm talking about downtown LA.
Yeah. Right across from Alvera, near Alvera Street.
Wasn't there a mosaic program with one of her descendants?
Yes. I gave a shorter version of this talk too.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you.